He threw down the challenge like it was a joke, but the words cut through the room with ice. "If someone can play this the way I want, I'll marry them," beamed billionaire Jonathan Blackwell, and the hall erupted in mockery. No one imagined the joke would become the start of a storm. The glass salon gleamed that evening, walls shimmering with success. In the corner, a figure moved quietly, a young black man in worn sneakers they called Ethan Cole. He usually swept crumbs silently from under the grand piano, knowing every scratch on those keys like his own palms. The Steinway dominated the center of the room, its black surface reflecting the chandeliers above like dark water. Ethan's mop squeaked against the marble. The sound always made him wince. When one of the guests jokingly pushed him toward the instrument, laughter hung suspended in the air. Ethan sat not for show, but because somewhere deep inside, his fingers remembered another life. Childhood behind a piano in a church hall, a teacher fired and forgotten. His calloused hands hovered over the keys. The crowd's chatter faded to white noise. The first chord exploded like a gunshot. The music he released wasn't an attempt to impress. It was revelation. Vulnerable, wise, impossibly precise. Each note carved through the pretense, stripping away the evening's facade. In that moment, the billionaire felt control slip through his manicured fingers. His face drained of color as the room fell silent. People who had been laughing seconds before pressed hands to their mouths. Phones were already recording. Within minutes, the footage would rocket across the internet. The first shock hit like an avalanche. Millions of views, thousands of comments, and Blackwell's reputation, along with his marriage and business deals, found itself in the crosshairs. Margaret Winters materialized from the crowd like a ghost from his past. Ethan's fingers never faltered on the keys, but his eyes found her face, a woman he knew from an old photograph tucked in his wallet. She approached with trembling steps, her voice a whisper that somehow cut through the music. "That melody, it's my lost composition. Recorded once with another pianist whose career was destroyed by a scandal buried by this very house." Her confession spilled across her weathered face. "They stole our music and called it business." The revelation hit the room like a second wave. This performance wasn't just touching hearts. It was excavating old crimes hidden beneath expensive parquet floors. Ethan's playing grew more intense, as if the piano itself was confessing decades of buried secrets. Jonathan Blackwell swayed on his feet. In the midst of the applause, as he tried desperately to smile for the cameras, the billionaire suddenly collapsed. Panic rippled through the crowd as guests looked away from their phones. But Ethan didn't continue playing. He rushed to Blackwell's side, placing his hands on the man's chest, beginning CPR that stopped the flow of video recordings for a precious moment. Humanity transformed the scene back into something real. The cameras captured not just talent, but the truth that poverty doesn't prevent compassion. Later, in the chaos, Ethan found notarized papers and old letters that had fallen from Jonathan's jacket. Documents proving that years ago, Blackwell had sabotaged not one, but several musicians' careers for a recording deal, and that this family harbored a birth secret no one knew about. The fourth twist, cut deepest of all. A document and old photograph, discovered in a music box on the piano shelf, silenced the room completely. The photo showed a man with a young child, inscribed, "For my son, if he ever hears the truth." Ethan took the photograph and, looking into the disturbed faces around him, announced that this man had been his father, once close to the Blackwells. The family's reputation suddenly faced the reality that their deals and secrets were intertwined with the fate of those they had humiliated. The party crumbled in the finale. Instead of fireworks, a public reckoning began. Political reporters and museums offered assistance, and Ethan, whose name only janitors had known before that evening, became a symbol that talent and dignity cannot be priced. But the real story began 3 hours earlier, in the service elevator. Ethan had been mopping the same spot for 10 minutes, his mind elsewhere. The industrial-grade cleaner burned his nostrils, pine sol mixed with something that made his eyes water. His mother's voice echoed in his head. "Music is a luxury we can't afford, baby." She'd said it 15 years ago, when the church piano lessons stopped, when the electricity got cut off, when dreams got folded up and put away like winter clothes. His supervisor, Martinez, barely looked up from his clipboard. "Cole, they need extra hands upstairs tonight. Big party. Keep your head down. Do your job. Get out." The man's accent carried the weariness of someone who'd given the same advice 1,000 times. "And Cole?" Don't touch nothing you ain't supposed to. The service entrance led to a different world. Marble replaced concrete. Crystal replaced fluorescent bulbs. The air smelled like expensive perfume instead of disinfectant. Ethan wheeled his cart along the wall, invisible as furniture to the guests in their tailored suits and designer gowns. "Excuse me." A woman in pearls stepped around him like he was a pothole. He'd grown used to being a ghost. 26 years old, community college dropout, living in a studio apartment in Queens where the radiator clanged all night and the neighbor's TV bled through thin walls. His reflection in the mansion's mirrors looked foreign, work uniform against mahogany and gold. The piano called to him before he saw it. Music had a scent he'd learned as a child. This Steinway smelled like possibility, wood polish and ivory, stories waiting to be told. His grandmother's ancient upright had smelled like cigarettes and regret. The church piano had smelled like hope and worn hymnals. This one smelled like money and silence. Jonathan Blackwell commanded the room without effort. 6'2", silver-haired, wearing confidence like a tailored jacket. His laugh carried the authority of someone who'd never been told no by anyone who mattered. The crowd hung on his every word, a constellation orbiting a sun. "Music," Blackwell declared, raising his champagne glass, "is about precision, about knowing your place." His eyes swept the room, landing briefly on Ethan before sliding away. "It's not feeling, it's technique." The statement landed wrong in Ethan's chest. Music without feeling was just noise. His grandmother had taught him that much. She'd made him understand that every note carried weight, that silence between sounds mattered as much as the sounds themselves. "Jonathan's being modest," laughed a woman dripping in diamonds. "Remember that concert pianist who tried to impress you last month? What was his name?" "Doesn't matter," Blackwell waved dismissively. "Talent without connections is just masturbation. Pretty to watch, ultimately useless." The room erupted in knowing chuckles. Ethan gripped his mop handle tighter, knuckles white against brown skin. He'd heard this song before, different venue, same lyrics. Success wasn't about what you could do. It was about who you knew, who you looked like, what zip code raised you. "Bet you couldn't find anyone here who could play that thing properly," someone called out, gesturing toward the piano. Blackwell's eyes gleamed. "I'll take that bet. In fact..." He paused for dramatic effect, the showman in him sensing opportunity. "If someone can play Chopin's ballad number, one the way it deserves to be played, with real understanding, I'll marry them." The declaration sent ripples of amusement through the crowd. Marriage as performance art, love as transaction. Everything had a price in Blackwell's world, even devotion. "What about him?" A young man in a Harvard tie pointed at Ethan. "The help. Bet he's got hidden talents." The suggestion sparked cruel laughter. Ethan felt heat rise in his cheeks, familiar shame burning behind his sternum. He'd been the entertainment before, the poor kid, the scholarship case, the diversity hire. Let's see what the charity case can do. "Come on," someone else chimed in. "It'll be fun, like those talent shows on TV." Blackwell studied Ethan with the interest of a scientist examining a specimen. "Why not? Entertainment value alone makes it worthwhile." The room held its breath, waiting for the show. Ethan wanted to disappear, wanted to push his cart back to the service elevator, clock out, take the subway home to his cramped apartment where the only expectations were paying rent and staying invisible. But something in Blackwell's expression, that casual dismissal, that assumption of incompetence, lit a fire in his chest. His grandmother's voice whispered from memory. "Don't let nobody tell you what you can't do, baby. Music don't care about your address." He walked to the piano. Each step echoed in the silent room. The bench felt foreign beneath him, too high, too soft, too expensive. His work uniform looked shabby against the Steinway's elegant lines. Cameras were already out, phones pointed like weapons. This would be online in minutes, shared and mocked by strangers who'd never know his name. His fingers found the keys. The first notes of Chopin's ballade emerged like water from a spring, tentative at first, then building into something larger. Ethan's calloused fingertips remembered the pattern, muscle memory awakening from 15 years of sleep. The melody wrapped around the room like smoke, seeping into every corner. This wasn't the aggressive Chopin he'd heard in concert halls, all technical precision and sterile perfection. This was the Chopin his grandmother had hummed while cooking Sunday dinner, the Chopin that understood poverty and longing. Each phrase carried the weight of his story, the church lessons cut short, the dreams deferred, the years of silence. The room had forgotten how to breathe. Ethan lost himself in the music, fingers dancing across keys that responded like old friends. The melody built toward its climax, and he felt something crack open in his chest, not breaking, but blooming. For the first time in years, he remembered who he'd wanted to be before the world taught him to want less. The final notes faded into perfect silence. When he looked up, Jonathan Blackwell's face had gone white. The billionaire's hands trembled as he reached for his champagne glass, missing it twice before making contact. Around the room, phones were still recording, but the cruel amusement had died. In its place sat something heavier, recognition, maybe, or shame. Margaret Winters emerged from the crowd like a woman walking underwater. Ethan knew her face from a photograph he carried, his father's producer, the woman who'd believed in musicians before believing became too expensive. She'd aged 20 years in 10, gray threading through what had once been auburn hair. That interpretation, she whispered, her voice cutting through the silence. I recorded it once. Different pianist, same soul. Her eyes found Ethan's. Your father played it exactly that way. The words hit him like cold water. His father, the man who disappeared when Ethan was 7, leaving only stories and an old photograph tucked in his mother's Bible. The musician who'd loved Chopin more than stability, who'd chosen art over responsibility until art chose someone else. David Cole, Margaret continued, her voice gaining strength. Brilliant pianist. Could have been great if... She looked at Blackwell, accusation heavy in her gaze. If certain people hadn't decided his kind of music wasn't marketable. Blackwell stumbled backward, one hand pressed to his chest. I don't... That was business. I don't... The words came out in fragments, but the room had already done the math. Success built on buried bodies, fortunes made from stolen dreams. The internet would have the story within minutes. Another scandal to feed the machine, another rich man's sins dragged into daylight. But Ethan wasn't thinking about justice or revenge as Blackwell collapsed. He was thinking about his grandmother's hands, teaching him CPR at the kitchen table, her voice calm and sure. Sometimes helping people who hurt you is the most human thing you can do. He caught Blackwell before the man hit marble, lowering him gently to the floor. The billionaire's expensive suit wrinkled under Ethan's work-roughened hands as he began chest compressions, counting under his breath. The crowd pressed closer, phones forgotten in the face of something real. Someone call 911, Ethan commanded, authority he'd never known he possessed ringing in his voice. The room obeyed without question. As he worked, papers scattered from Blackwell's jacket, legal documents, old contracts, letters yellow with age. Margaret knelt beside them, her hands shaking as she gathered the evidence of years buried under money and influence. Jesus, she whispered, holding up a birth certificate. Jonathan, look at the date. Look at the father's name. David Cole. The same David Cole who'd played Chopin for empty churches and smaller dreams. The same man whose son now knelt on million-dollar marble, breathing life into the lungs of his father's destroyer. The paramedics arrived 17 minutes later, finding a room transformed. The party had become a wake for illusions, the celebration a reckoning. As they loaded Blackwell onto a stretcher, stable, conscious, scared, Ethan stood with Margaret Winters and watched 15 years of questions find their answers. Your father never knew, Margaret said softly, about you, about Jonathan, about any of it. She handed him a letter from the scattered documents, his name written in handwriting that matched his memory. But he left this, just in case. The letter was short, written in the shaky hand of someone running out of time. If you're reading this, it means the music found you anyway. I'm sorry I wasn't strong enough to stay, but maybe that's not the point. Maybe the point is that you're strong enough to play your own song. The world will try to tell you what music should sound like, what stories matter, who deserves to be heard. Don't listen. Play what's true. Play what hurts. Play what heals. Play for the people who need to remember they're not invisible. Love your father, who never stopped believing in the next note. Ethan folded the letter carefully, sliding it into his uniform pocket next to his grandmother's prayer card. Around him, the mansion began to empty as reporters arrived and lawyers made phone calls. The story was already spreading, videos trending, hashtags forming. Justice served one viral moment at a time. But the real story was smaller, quieter. A young man at a piano, playing for his father's ghost and his own future. A woman remembering why she'd loved music before it broke her heart. A room full of people forced to confront the difference between having everything and being human. 3 months later, Ethan Cole played his first official concert at Carnegie Hall, not as entertainment or curiosity, but as an artist. The program listed him simply, pianist. No backstory required, no context needed. Just music, played the way it deserved to be played. Jonathan Blackwell attended from the back row, a different man in an unchanged suit. He'd survived his heart attack and lost most of his fortune to settlements and legal fees, but something in his eyes had awakened. Maybe conscience, maybe simple recognition of the cost of forgetting what mattered. Margaret Winters sat in the front row, program clutched in hands that no longer trembled. She'd started a foundation for young musicians who couldn't afford to dream, funded partly by Blackwell's reparations and partly by the power of stories told at the right moment. When Ethan's fingers found the opening notes of Chopin's Ballade No. 1, the audience fell silent. But this time, the silence felt different, not shocked or amused or waiting for failure. This silence listened. And in that listening, David Cole's son played the song his father had never finished, for everyone who'd been told they didn't belong in rooms where music lived. The last note faded into applause that felt like prayer. Later, reporters would ask about inspiration and overnight success, about viral videos and social justice. Ethan would smile and give careful answers about hard work and opportunity, about music as universal language and art as democracy. But privately, he'd remember the smell of pine sol and the weight of silence, the moment when invisible became undeniable. He'd remember that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is simply refuse to stay quiet when the world expects you to whisper. Music, after all, had never cared about zip codes or expectations. It only cared about truth, played one honest note at a time. Play what's true, play what hurts, play what heals.